Beijing, the capital of China. There are so many architectural miracles here. Beijing is always stunning the world. Its rapid economic progress means that its cityscape changes every day. But the increasingly snarling traffic is one major problem of the city. Today, a record-breaking solution for this will be put in place. 31 lines, 560 stations, a distance of 1,000 kilometers. This city will finally have a veritable subway network above and underground. When it is finished, this will be the world's biggest subway network. It is yet another one of China's mega projects. Jie Xue works in a Beijing company. She's going to meet an important client today. She needs to travel 10 kilometers and must be on time. But this is the peak traffic hour of commuters in Beijing. About 8 million people are on the road at this hour. Traffic is at its most congested.
Expect slow traffic at the Jingjia Twin Bridge.
The 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th Ring Road. The city is rapidly expanding around its center. There are over 20 million people and 5 million cars in this city. Traffic congestion is becoming a huge problem for Beijing. But Beijing's population and the number of cars are increasing every day. Despite the many restrictions the city has placed on owning cars, this problem doesn't seem to be going away. Even driving restrictions can't help to ease the traffic. The average amount of time Beijingers spend on the road each day is an hour and a half. Under these challenging traffic conditions, the subway might just be a better option for people like Jie Xue to get to places on time. The subway itself is always crowded. The 14 lines currently in operation can no longer handle the sheer amount of commuters each day. Easing these conditions has become an urgent matter. A vastly expanded subway network is currently being put into place. By 2020, the Beijing subway will add 16 new lines to its existing 14. The new network will cover over 1,000 kilometers of the city. In many cities around the world, a subway network will take close to a century to complete. But Beijing's goal is to complete its subway network within 10 years. How are they going to take on this mega project? More than 10 construction companies with over 10,000 workers are working their excavators around the clock. In 2011 alone, 7 new subway lines were being constructed at the same time. But digging tunnels hundreds of kilometers in length and building hundreds of new subway stations at the same time is not going to be easy. In many big cities, the subway system usually predates the city or grows with it. This gives the subway system a lot of room to develop. But the city of Beijing went from being an ancient city hundreds of years old to a modern megalopolis. There is an intricate network of underground pipes and building foundations underneath the city. Constructing a huge subway network through all of this is going to be a real challenge. Below these pipelines and foundations, workers are building a new subway line. This line will run from east to west, straight through the center of Beijing. This presents an interesting problem for the architects.
The most important thing to consider is the fact that there are many ancient foundations below ground.
Beijing is an ancient city. The historical streets and quaint alleyways of the city have been revamped with new sights and sounds. For the average tourist, this is old Beijing at its most authentic. The new subway line will be built right under here. How are the engineers going to deal with these fragile old buildings?
Originally, the 6th line was supposed to pass through the imperial city in the center. But after considering the opinions of experts, we've decided to shift the subway line north by 1.5 kilometers. This is so as to preserve the imperial city.
But adjusting one part of a subway line alone is not enough to ensure the safety of these ancient buildings. The construction methods used in this project play an important factor too. This is the biggest department involved in designing the Beijing subway. The architects are discussing how to construct the subway through the old city. Once a subway line is planned, the architects will spend 3 years here working out the minute details of the line. Then, the new line will move to its construction phase, which can take up to 4 years. Their work will only come into fruition in the future. It takes almost 10 years of work for them to see any results. If you ride a newly opened subway line in 2012, it will most likely have been designed in 2005. Beijing used to be an imperial city. The Yongding-Meng and the Drum Tower form a central axis on which the city is strictly planned, reflecting the strict authority of imperial power. The famous Chinese architect Liang Xicheng once said that Beijing's regal beauty comes from its adherence to this axis. Today's Beijing has developed along this structure. It is because the city came before the subway system that the subway is forced to adapt to the city structure.
Beijing is a large city. It is very dense too. The subway system must therefore adapt to the way the city has developed, so that it resembles the way the roads are laid out. It basically follows the line of the grid system and the ring roads that surround the city.
In order to better protect the ancient buildings above, the architects have chosen to use a system never before seen in Beijing. When the tunnel diggers run into the ancient foundations of buildings, the tunnels will run on top of one another instead of parallel to each other. This reduces the area affected in the excavation, thus reducing the impact on these ancient foundations. The tunnels are now able to pass through these historical areas safely. On top of this, there is another more important factor to consider: Beijing's soil. In many other places, soil conditions have caused collapses during subway construction. To prevent this from happening in Beijing, the engineers have to study the soil in the city. The soil surveying team works at night to avoid holding up traffic. They are surveying the soil for the new subway lines. They will have to drill a hole 40 meters deep every 50 meters to collect soil samples for analysis back at the laboratory. Things are going pretty well tonight. The team has successfully extracted their first soil sample, but a large part of the night has gone by, and they still have another 299 holes left to dig. Although this work is tiring and time-consuming, it is absolutely necessary. It provides important reference data for the planning and construction of the subway line. In the early 1960s, construction began on the Beijing subway, the first subway system in China. At that time, there weren't many buildings above ground, and the subway line was entirely located 10 meters underground. The tunnels were dug in an open pit entirely by manual labor. No excavators were used at all. This speed of construction would be unacceptable today. Beijing is no longer the city it used to be. Globalization has imposed high standards on the city. The increasingly dense cityscape and congested roads make it absolutely necessary that the subway is constructed quickly. A new technology is often used in the digging of tunnels. This machine is many times faster than manual labor. This is the tunnel boring machine. A rotating cutting wheel is located at the front end of the machine. It sends the excavated soil to a chamber where the soil is mixed with slurry. The mixture is then sent to the back where it is disposed by carriage. The tunnel boring machine is the best machine to excavate tunnels. It is known not only for its speed, but also the size of its cutter head. The biggest tunnel boring machine in the world has a diameter of almost 20 meters and is 7 stories high. Naturally, it is not an easy task to get such a gargantuan machine underground. Ruixuan Gao is the fastest tunnel boring machine operator in China. His job is to operate the machine continuously 13 hours a day according to its planned route. There is no room for mistakes. This is a complex and tedious job.
All I do every day is sit in the control room of the tunnel boring machine. The room is about 1.2 square meters. The only sound I hear is the rumble of the digging. It gets really stuffy in here. Because I spend 12 to 13 hours underground every day, sometimes I don't get to see the sun at all for months. Around me, nothing changes. The only way I know that I'm moving forward is by pushing buttons and seeing the numbers move.
The only time Ruixuan Gao gets to rest is when the workers connect the tunnel lining. Every 1.2 meters, the machine will stop so that the workers can install the tunnel walls. There are usually 6 segments to the tunnel wall. These segments differ in size and have different connecting points. The workers have to carefully piece them together to ensure that they fit snugly with each other. As the tunnel boring machine moves forward, the wall of the tunnel is completed at the same time. When the wall of the tunnel is finished, another team begins its job. This team makes sure that the tunnel is following its planned trajectory. This is important in making sure that the tunnel boring machine emerges at the right place. The tunnel boring machine is necessary to ensure the largest subway network ever built is finished in 10 years. At the height of construction, more than 100 tunnel boring machines are working underground at any one time. Each one of these machines costs 50 million yuan. Each kilometer of the tunnel costs 1 billion yuan to build. The entire subway network will span over 1,000 kilometers. The costs involved in its construction would have been unimaginable in the past. China's rapid economic development in the past 30 years has allowed Beijing to undertake a mega project like this. Beijing is developing at an astonishing pace. Its traffic situation, though, leaves much to be desired. As the roads get more and more congested every day, bad traffic is becoming a major problem in people's lives. The city planners of Beijing need to step up their game. The tunnel section near Military Museum Station on Line 9 is still being dug the old way, by manual labor. It takes 18 months for the workers to construct 1 kilometer of tunnel. the tunnel boring machine would have only taken 3 months, but this can't be helped. There just isn't enough space for the tunnel boring machine to go underground here. The newly constructed military museum station is located along the busiest section of Chang'an Avenue. A huge pit would have to be excavated for the tunnel boring machine to go underground. This would have been impossible on a busy road like this. Line 9 is scheduled to open at the end of 2012. The only way for this to happen is for the workers to work faster. There is yet another problem to be solved here. Line 9 has to cross under the existing Line 1. In subway construction, to build a tunnel under an existing one is the most dangerous thing to do. However, this is not the only problem for this new station. Under the new subway plan, Line 9 will intersect with Line 1 with a new military museum station serving as an interchange station. Line 1 was built close to the surface, and so the new line will have to be built under it. But the problem is that under Line 1 there is a large layer of water. For Line 9 to intersect Line 1 from below, the new station would have to be built in this layer of water. It's a nightmare to carry out construction in an underground body of water. The water could lead to collapses any time. The workers will have to drain this water before they can begin work. It takes 2 whole months to drain the water. When the workers examine the water level again, they discover that it has not dropped significantly. This adds another level of difficulty to an already difficult project. But it is absolutely necessary to build this station. 1 kilometer away from it is the largest railway station in Asia, Beijing West Station. The volume of passengers it receives per day is one of the biggest in China. However, not a single subway line goes to this station. Because of this, it has long been one of the most congested areas in the city. The military museum station on Line 9 will connect with the Beijing West Station, allowing passengers to also change to other lines. This will help to ease congestion around the Beijing West Station. But there still doesn't seem to be a solution for the military museum station. The engineers are stumped. At the other end of the city, the tunnel boring machine operator Wu Xuangao has also run into a problem. The tunnel boring machine has to face a new challenge.
The longest time we've spent down here is 26 hours. We've only bored 10 centimeters so far.
The reason the boring machine lost its power lies in the complex soil structure of Beijing. The east and west ends of Beijing are slightly elevated. Because of the sediments deposited by the rivers, the soil on the east side of Beijing is sandy, while that on the west side is rocky. Tunnel boring machines do not deal well with hard, rocky soil. The big boulders in the soil turn along with the machine's cutter head, making it impossible for the machine to advance forward. If forced to push forward, the blades on the machine's cutter head will get damaged. The soil structure is a problem for tunnel boring machines around the world. As traffic gets worse every day, the pressure to finish the project on time weighs down on everyone. This means that Wu Xuangao is forced to stay in the tunnel for even longer periods of time. Every moment underground now frays his nerves.
Every time I go in there, I get so annoyed. Every time I hear the rumble of the machine, I ask myself, what am I doing in here? Why don't I just pack up my stuff and go home?
At 5 o'clock in the morning, the first subway trains leave the depot after making their preparations. They are getting ready to set out on their day ahead. A new day has begun. The subway trains begin their 18-hour workday. Only now does Ri Xuankao get off work and see the light of day. As he emerges from the tunnel, he realizes that the moment he walks out of the tunnel every morning is the happiest moment of his day. He receives texts from his friends and family from far away and feels the first rays of the morning sun on his face. After many rounds of discussion, the experts finally come up with a bold solution for the military museum station.
8.5 meters deeper.
They have decided to move the new station 8.5 meters deeper underground. They will now bore deeper to build the new station below the body of water. There are two ways of constructing the tunnels for the subway: the trench method and the trenchless method. The trench method requires many steel beams for support. The workers can thus work safely underground. But the drawback to this method is that it generates widespread disruption on the surface level. Because the subway lines run close to the road system, using the trench method would only paralyze Beijing's traffic further. At the same time, with the price of real estate these days, removing and transporting soil would cost an astronomical amount of money. So in light of this, a new method was invented. This new method is called the trenchless method. It involves boring a few small tunnels underground and then expanding them to form the shape of the station, then getting rid of any unnecessary soil in between. This entire process takes place underground, minimizing surface level disruption. This is the perfect solution for the military museum station. This method is more difficult and more time-consuming than the trench method, but it is the only solution now. First, a vertical well is drilled deep into the ground. Above them is the layer of water that cannot be drained. There are only 3 meters of ground between them and the water. The engineers need to make sure that this layer of ground doesn't collapse or leak. At every step of the way, reinforced concrete is used to strengthen the ceiling. This will ensure that the workers stay safe. But there is one more factor the engineers need to keep in mind. The subsidence of the ground must not exceed 3 millimeters. There are strict requirements put in place for the distance between train and tracks. If the ground sinks more than 3 millimeters, the tracks will warp in shape. The trains will then have to reduce their speed when going over these deformed tracks, making the coordination of these intersecting lines a huge mess. 3 millimeters might seem small compared to a project of this scale, but the subway engineers need to always keep this number in mind, because above them lies a 50-year-old subway line, Line 1. Line 1 was the very first subway line in Beijing. Today, it is one of the main transport lines of the city. Over 1 million commuters use this line every day. Above this line is Chang'an Avenue, in the middle of which is Tiananmen Square, the heart of Beijing and a special symbol for the people of the city. There are several stations east and west of Tiananmen on Line 1. On public holidays, this line gets incredibly crowded. But this line started its life as an asset for civil defense. In the early days of the People's Republic, people either got around Beijing by foot or by rickshaw. The president at the time, Zhou Enlai, once said that 200 buses is enough to provide transportation for the entire city. The Beijing subway only came into existence because China needed to prepare for war. The Moscow Metro played a big part in the Soviet Union's defense during the Second World War. This inspired the newly formed People's Republic. After 10 years of planning in 1965, Beijing started construction on the first subway system in China. But the construction of the subway was arduous and fraught with difficulties.
We designed the whole subway system in less than half a year. We were so nervous at the time because we had no experience in this and nobody to learn from. We just decided to do it on our own. We were all bent over our plans, drawing them bit by bit. That was during the summer, I remember. It was really hot. We were so afraid that the sweat from our elbows would smudge our plans, so we put towels underneath and continued drawing.
After 4 years of work, Line 1 began operations in 1969. Because the subway was meant primarily for military transport at the time, Line 1 wasn't open to the public. Only invited guests could ride it. It was a much simpler time. The subway stations were known as underground palaces.
To build this subway, to build the first subway in China, we worked really hard. I'm very proud of what I've done. Very proud.
Meanwhile, construction on the Metro Museum station is taking place right underneath. A special method is being used to prevent the subsidence of Line 1. This method was used in the construction of the London Underground 20 years before. It prevented Big Ben from leaning on its side. If any part of the ground shows signs of subsidence during the building of the tunnel, steel pipes will be inserted to support the ground. Cement will then be pumped through these pipes into the ground to make it more sturdy. Although this helps to mitigate the risks, such a large-scale operation still has its dangers. Every day, reports on the construction's progress will be sent here. A dedicated team is set in place to monitor the entire construction in real time. Not one problem escapes their eyes. Workers at another line are facing the same problem of building a new line underneath a pre-existing one, but they have decided to use a different method to deal with this. This is another station where a new line will intersect an old line. The only difference is that between the two stations, there is neither a layer of water nor ground. They are built close to each other.
Right now we're standing in the new Line 10, which is undergoing construction. The steel beams are supporting a concrete base on the ceiling. On top of this base is the operational Line 1.
Underneath this 40-year-old station, a void is being excavated to make way for the new station. The workers need to make sure there are no disruptions to the operations above and that the ground doesn't sink more than 3 millimeters. Almost everyone involved thinks this is impossible, but engineer Hao believes it will work. His secret weapon is the jack post.
Every steel beam is fitted with a jack post on top. It supports the base structure above it.
The jack posts are placed on the load-bearing walls and support beams of the new station. They will end up being wedged between the two stations. These jack posts can weigh from 30 kilograms to 90 kilograms. They can bear weight up to 1,600 times their own weight. The position of each jack post is precisely calculated. They can each be carefully adjusted through a hydraulic cylinder to compensate for any subsidence in the ground. As construction moves forward, the engineers monitor the subsidence of the ground closely. The moment it gets close to 3 millimeters, the workers will increase the pressure on the jack posts. As Rixuan Gao frets over the slowness of the tunnel boring machine, experts are trying to find ways to continue the boring process. This is the second rush hour in Beijing, and it is worse than the first. The average time spent on the road at this time is 2 hours. The subway system during this time is incredibly crowded. Line 5 has 800,000 commuters a day. It is fast approaching its projected ridership numbers for 2031. Traffic congestion is slowly spreading from the city center to its periphery. The road system of Beijing is getting seriously congested. Beijing's social cohesion and abundant resources are drawing scores of foreigners into the city. There is a large immigrant population here. According to the 6th census, there are close to 20 million residents in Beijing, out of which 7 million are people who are not natively born. 1 in every 3 people here is not a native Beijinger.
I collect data for maps. Every day I go all around Beijing collecting data to update existing maps.
Almost every city in China incorporates Chinese tradition in its design. This is especially pronounced in the capital, Beijing. The city is growing vertically day by day, but it is also expanding outwards from a center.
Beijing is developing so rapidly. A place that was an empty field just a while ago can suddenly become a skyscraper. In order to include more data about the city in our maps, we have to make our scale smaller and smaller.
The center of Beijing has the most expensive apartments, the most concentrated office area, and the busiest shopping districts. All the best resources can be found in the city center. Although Xi Laijiao works in the center of Beijing, he cannot afford the high rents there. He has to live further away and take the first train to work every morning. It is a long commute. Compared to Xi Laijiao, Yu Xin is less fortunate.
I work in the city, but I live here because the rent is cheaper. This is so far from where I work. Every day, I have to wait such a long time for the bus to get to and from work. The bus journey is so long, too, and I need to change buses several times. It takes me a few hours just to get to work. My greatest wish is to be able to take the subway to and from work.
Every day, large amounts of people travel to and from the city. Traffic on the ground is increasingly unable to sustain this. Beijing has been expanding more and more from its city center to its periphery. The center of the city is growing day by day. As a megalopolis, Beijing needs a core center. But this center should not expand uncontrollably. City planners are trying to find new ways of balancing the city's infrastructure with its traffic and environment.
This is a question faced by every single city in the world. I think Beijing should be developing in a more polycentric way.
A new city plan is being laid out in Beijing. The central axis and Chang'an Avenue form a cross that will act as the core of its new development. At the same time, new centers will be set up in the east and west parts of the city, with new service areas in these districts. The plan is to have a polycentric city based along the two axes. But Beijing's old city plan has been in existence for a long time. The ring roads surrounding the city have also set its structure in place. The only way to challenge the old city structure is to have a robust rail system.
From the city centre to the new outlying centres, we need to establish express railway systems. The only way to develop these outlying centres is to provide railway access to the city. These new centres will then develop around the train stations along the way.
More and more lines are being built to service the outskirts of the city. This is easing the pressure on the city center. By 2020, the subway network will cover over 1,000 kilometers. This is equivalent to the distance between Beijing and Shanghai. And these rail lines will all be located underground. But will the increasingly dense city accommodate the subway? This 45-ton, 16-meter-long steel object is a component of a machine. Workers at the Line 14 construction site are assembling China's biggest tunnel boring machine. It has a diameter of 10 meters and is as tall as a 3-story building. For such a big machine to go underground is no easy task at all. All tunnel boring machines have to be dismantled on the ground and reassembled underground from their constituent parts. The size of this machine just means that more time will be spent doing this task. After 6 months, the assembled and tested machine finally begins its work. Behind the machine is a tunnel with a diameter of 10 meters. Instead of being a traditional single-carriage tunnel, this tunnel can accommodate 2 trains side by side at the same time. This saves precious underground space. The Beijing subway no longer has just one line. It is now a complex subway network that covers the entire city. With time, this network will only grow bigger. We have reason to believe that this will make the average commute much shorter. In less than 10 years, this massive project will have to be finished. The pressure of time and the pressure from the increasingly congested roads is making everybody do the best that they can. The deadline for the Central Access Line is fast approaching. The stations on the line are already in their decorating phase. At this moment, the architects are discussing the last details of the plan. In 2008, the 29th Olympic Games were held in Beijing. 100,000 people gathered in the Beijing National Stadium to watch the opening ceremony. After the ceremony, the sheer amount of people traveling out of the stadium would have caused a huge traffic jam in the city. Before the opening ceremony, lines 5, 8, and 10 of the Beijing subway were open to the public to better service the Olympic Games. Line 8 is even named the Olympic Branch Line. During this time, the subway system has to sustain an enormous amount of riders, possibly more than it ever has before. Even then, there is a limit to the number of commuters the subway system can transport. Transporting all the commuters leaving the games is going to be a huge challenge for the subway system. The most viable way is to increase the number of trains to transport all the passengers. Right before the line is about to be open to the public, a new train car is being put to the test. The goal of the test is to reduce the waiting time between trains. The red light ahead is a signal that the train should not move forward. But this test is to see if it is possible to override this red light. The control room is monitoring the situation closely. At first, the train pushes forward according to its designated speed. A few minutes later, the train approaches the area.
There's a red light.
You can run the red light.
Run the red light. Copy that.
If it is possible to run the red light, it would mean that the computer of the train isn't functioning well. The operators are trying to see if the system allows that. The train is fast approaching the red light. The train is unable to run the red light. The system forces the train to stop 2 meters away from the red light, ensuring the train's distance from the train ahead of it. This is the most advanced signal technology. The time between trains has been reduced from 10 minutes to just 3 minutes. After the closing ceremony, the subway system manages to disperse the 100,000-strong crowd in just 40 minutes. Thanks to its spectacular performance during the Olympic Games, this system has been put in place since then. The waiting time between trains during rush hour has been reduced from 10 minutes to 2.5 minutes. Originally, there were only 6 trains in an hour. Now, 24 trains pass through the station every hour, raising the subway system's transport capability.
The 2008 Olympics hastened the progress of the subway system. It really sped things up.
You know, when it comes down to it, I think the city's development is reflected in the needs of its transport system and its subway system as well.
It is precisely this urgent need that forces the Beijing subway to quicken its construction speed. As the Beijing subway network expands, new lines are being opened. The greater transport capacity of the subway, higher safety standards, and greater need for comfort in the train make it a challenge for the train manufacturers. New and better train cars are being manufactured. 4,800 components, 50,000 joints, and various types of connecting parts are used to complete this massive operation. But the manufacturers have only 2.5 days to do this. The newly manufactured train cars are fitted and tested within 2 months before joining the fleet. And yet, the subway is still really crowded. In 2000, 400 million people rode on the Beijing subway. 10 years later, this number has increased to 1.8 billion. The Beijing subway has one of the highest riderships in the world. During the construction of the new lines, one of the priorities is to reduce the time taken to change trains.
Before 2000, most interchange stations were structured like this. These are the tracks and platform for one line, and these are the tracks and platform for another line. Between them both, there are walkways to connect the two stations. Most of these walkways are one-directional. Passengers would get off the train, walk to the entrance of the station, then walk through the walkways to the entrance of this other station. The distance is about 100 meters.
The Hong Kong MTR is the easiest subway in the world to change trains. The design of the subway lines allow for passengers to change trains on the same platform. The new lines of the Beijing subway will use this system as well.
These are the tracks of one line. This platform will have 2 sides. When we're playing the other line, we'll make it so that it'll pass through the other side of the platform. Passengers can now change trains by just crossing the platform. They no longer have to get off the platform and walk through the station to get to the other platform. All they have to do now is cross the platform. It'll be a distance of about 10 meters. It'll be very convenient.
Every piece of data passes through this center. This is the command center of the subway. It monitors every single train in every single line. In 2020, when subway ridership reaches another peak, this center will be crucial in coordinating the biggest subway system in the world.
Add some lather. If you don't add lather, the steel beam will swing right here. No. It's okay. Is there any water in the cabin? How's the tunnel boring machine's vertical posture?
It's boring as per normal now. Only 10 centimeters more and we're through.
Today, the tunnel boring machine that Rushuan Gao is operating will finally come through the other side. What should have taken only 3 months to bore has taken a year due to the soil structure. Finally, the machine is coming out of the earth. This is the most dangerous moment of his job. If the boring machine is slightly off mark, it might not be able to bore through the opening. It might even cause the opening of the tunnel to collapse. Sand and water would then gush out of the earth.
Raise the machine a little bit. You need to put more force on the cylinders below.
Roger that.
To Rushuan Gao, this is the most crucial moment.
We can see 2/3 of the cutting head now. It's coming, here it comes. The machine is out of the hole. You may stop moving forward now.
After the celebration, Rushuan Gao always walks through the tunnel he just bored.
To everyone else, the tunnel never ends. Every part of it looks like the part before. It looks really boring to them, but not for me. I know every single part of this tunnel. I bored the tunnel myself, centimeter by centimeter. When I walk through it, I think of how it was when I was boring certain parts. It makes me think of what I was feeling at the time.
This mega project is still ongoing. Thousands of people are still working on it. They pour their sweat into making this engineering miracle so that one day, the world will look at it and be stunned. This day is not far in the making. In 2020, this vast underground network will give new life to the city. It will change the very appearance of Beijing, marking a new chapter in Chinese history.